Now, I've got a bit of a problem. I've got several problems, in fact. But when I order things online, I tend to get the size slightly wrong. So the first time this happened, we were doing up a house, and it was a Victorian terrace, and I wanted some nice brass doorknobs, and I was searching on eBay. I wanted about 12 of them, and I came across some on eBay, and I thought, that is a bargain. 12 genuine brass, Victorian-style brass knobs for only £14.99. I should have seen it coming. So I ordered them. They look great in the pictures. And then this little parcel arrived in my house, and it turns out they were for a doll's house and weren't very good. So the reason I tell you that is because this morning we're going to use these bowls. And on the packet, I thought they were substantially bigger. They're only that small, so you're going to have to bear with me as we do that. But if you're a bit younger and there are a few seats nearer the front, so it might help you, if you want to come to the front so you can see a little bit better. But I will do my best for those of you at the back. But on a day like today, we think all about remembering. Hey, yes, few next to Juliet there, if you want to sit next to Juliet, wonderful. We think all about remembering. And I wonder what your earliest memory is. Now, that's going to be easier for some of you than others, but what's your earliest memory? The first thing in your life that you can remember happening. Maybe just very quickly turn to your neighbor, or if you're in a little family group, turn and just say, can you remember the first thing in your life? What's your earliest memory? Okay. You can share those a little bit more afterwards. Now, the thing about remembering our earliest memory, it's actually quite hard to know whether you remember it, whether you actually remember being there, or whether you remember it because you've been told it so many times by your family, and so it's become like a memory, but maybe you can't remember it, but you remember it because somebody else has passed it on. It's become part of your memory and part of your story, even if you don't actually remember it yourself. And up on the screen, there was a picture of some bunny slippers. And the reason I put those up there is in our family, there's this tale that gets told, and I can remember it vividly, of how my younger sister was picked up by my parents, completely ready for a bath, apart from she'd left her bunny slippers in. And she was put in the bath, and the bunny slippers all got wet, and it was hilarious, and ha, ha, ha. Now, I remember that vividly. I only found out recently, I wasn't even in the room when that happened. So what I thought was my earliest memory isn't a memory at all, but it's become a memory because my family have passed it on. There's another story told in our family, and I can remember it vividly, of my grandpa, who was in Trafalgar Square when it was really busy and people were pressing up against each other. He was stood by Nelson's column, and he went to put his hand in his back pocket, and he found somebody else's hand in there. Somebody was trying to steal his wallet, and apparently my granddad just kind of went like that. The guy shrieked in pain, and off he ran, and my granddad still held on to his wallet. Now, I definitely wasn't there because my granddad died before I was born, but I can picture it. I know that memory vividly. But it's not my story. It's a shared story. And sometimes stories, remembering, involves passing a story on from a family, from one generation to the next. We can have, as a community, as a church, shared memories. It's what the Bible does. It shares a memory and passes it on. And so today, we're just going to think about how we remember. And I want us to think about that word, remember, in two ways. And the first is the sense that we usually think of that word. We remember. We call to mind that which is past, and we remind ourselves of the stories, and we respond accordingly. And our Christian faith is built on this kind of remembering, stories that have been passed from one generation to another, and they're recorded in the Bible. And it starts the Bible you may well know about how God created the world. And the Bible said God created the world. And it was like this bowl a little bit, in that it was brand new and it was shiny and it was Can you see anything wrong with that bowl? You can. It's too tiny. Yeah, okay, very good, very good. Got me. Apart from being really tiny, there's no imperfections. It is perfect. The Bible even says that you and I were created, and God said it was very good. But we read in the Bible, we remember that sin entered the world. And sin can be described as I want, I have to have, and I will take. And we read that perfect creation was damaged and broken. So I need a little volunteer who can just come and help me. Do you want to come up? Come on then, up you come. Quick as you can. Is she all right with a hammer, guy? Great. Okay. So what I want you to do, can you see the shape of the bowl there? Can you give it one hard knock for me, please? Because we're going to break it. Bit harder. Bit harder again. There we go. One more time. Thank you very much. Okay, go and take a seat. I'll just make sure. There we go. Wonderful. And you will be able to see that what was perfect is now shattered and broken. And most people would go, well, that's a shame. Let's throw it away. There's no use for it anymore. And we only need to look around at our world and turn on the news to see all kinds of ways in which our world around us is broken. And today we think about conflicts, and we think about war and the loss of war and the pain of war particularly. And we remember those who've given their lives and have suffered in the brokenness of our world. I'm just going to ask Juliet to come up for this next bit. If you'd like to don the gloves. But what we see, what we remember in the Bible is that God doesn't leave us in our brokenness. And what we see is this prophecy in Isaiah that we heard read to us, that there was a promise that God was going to do something about all the brokenness. And then as we read on in the Bible, we see Jesus stand up right at the start of his ministry in Luke 4. And he reads out this promise. It's like he's saying, no, God remembers his promises. God hasn't forgotten you. And Jesus says, in me, this promise is now fulfilled. And this is where the second use of the word remember comes in. You see, the word member is another way of saying body. Body. And so to remember something is to re-embody something. Is to give shape again to something that was broken. And Jesus said these words from Isaiah at the start of his ministry, that he had come to proclaim good news to the poor. Slowly starting to build and restore. He'd come to bind up the brokenhearted. He'd come to add another piece to proclaim freedom for the captives. He'd come to bring light to the darkness. He'd come to comfort those who mourn. And he'd come to turn despair into praise. And what was broken, eventually, if we persist, into something beautiful. And at the heart of this putting things back together was love. And Jesus puts it like this in John 5:13. Maybe a bit more glue. Hold it. We've got that. Don't worry about it. Cool. Juliet's going to persist. But Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for his friends. And at the heart of love, at the heart of remembering, is the willingness to put other needs before our own. Whatever we feel like, to sacrifice everything, even life itself, for the good of others. And today, of course, we remember those who laid down their life so that we can live in freedom. But in fact, those people who laid down their life for freedom are actually re-embodying what Jesus came into this world to do. If Juliet persisted, thank you, Juliet. Sorry, puff it out. Just for Helen, if you look at the screens, here's one we did earlier. Here's one we did earlier. The glue that Juliet's been using, the glue used there is a special kind of gold glue. 24 karat gold is in that glue. And it's a special kind of art that you might have heard of, a Japanese art called kintsugi. And this art takes what is broken and rather than throwing it away, gets gold and builds it back together so that what was broken is now remembered and is made beautiful. And it's an amazing image of what Jesus can do in our lives. That he can take our brokenness, he can take the brokenness of the world, and he can put it back together. He can redeem, he can restore, he can turn it into something beautiful. Even the resurrected body of Jesus, if you think about it, still had the marks of brokenness on it. Jesus' body, glowing as he'd come back to life, still had nail marks in his hands and still had scar tissue down his side. You see, Jesus came to find us in our brokenness and when we were lost. He becomes broken for us. And from that brokenness and weakness, he brings beauty and a promise to make all things new. It's what we're going to be celebrating in a few moments as we share communion. But then Jesus calls us to be people who maybe do it a little bit better than this, but who go out and do the same for our world. In your school, where there's people who are sad. In your workplaces, where there's people who are broken. In our worlds, where there's peace and conflict. Jesus sends us to remember, to re-embody, to turn brokenness into beauty, and praise for despair, and bring joy in place of mourning. Amen.